Morning, hello, hi, hello. Happy Valentine's Day. Hi, how are we all doing? We good? Right, thank you for joining us. And it's not just a pretty space. We welcome you all. We welcome our guests. We welcome Tracy from Stansons, Deepak, MCM, Emily, MCM. Today's objective is to change the way of traditional thinking in a workplace design. We want to sort of push out the normal ways of thinking how design is done. We want to inspire designers and workplace managers to change the way the workplace looks now in this present time and then going forward into the future. So that'll be some of the foundational stuff. A few housekeeping rules. Questions are always allowed. If you have anything that you think is thought-provoking or you'd like to challenge something or agree, please put your hand up. We welcome questions at any point. Other than that, sorry, that is just stunning. Very nice. Sorry.
There's a dog in the front. If you don't know
dog in the front. Super nice.
Got a little Valentine.
Yeah. Super stunning. Nice. Right. Right. So we'll kick it off with the introductions. We'll start with Emily and then straight into Deepak and end with Tracy, and then we'll get rolling. So, yeah, welcome all again. Thank you very much, Emily and Deepak. Thank you and welcome. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Emily Fiddes, for those I don't know. I'm a workplace consultant at MCM. My background is in architecture and design, but I now primarily work in the workplace consultancy area, so working in workplace strategy and behavioural change.
Great. Morning, everyone. I'm Deepak Parmar. I'm the design director at MCM. I'm also our B Corp lead. And my background is traditionally, I studied interior design. I've been in the world of workplace for way too many years. But more recently, I suppose, my real interest has been how do you combine kind of purpose and practice, which is the reason we're a B Corp. And I suppose in particular in relation to this conversation is around, I really kind of question the sole role of aesthetics when it comes to real kind of employee engagement. I think you've got to go way beyond that. And the conversations we're having with clients now, the aesthetics are almost just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many more factors to what creates a successful workplace. So hopefully we'll delve into it more today. Tracy.
Good.
Hi, my name is Tracy. I work for Stansons as a product creative. I have a residential background. I'm doing stuff for fabric houses and workplace design in a bathroom company. And yeah, I'm excited about today.
Fantastic. Nice. Right. Well, so, yeah, we'll just get straight into a start-off question. From there, it's probably more going to be a conversation than questions and answers. So just as a start-off topic, Deepak, if we sort of dig into what you started and then we'll take it from there, how do you think that the design role will change now and then in the recent years? Where do you see the industry sort of moving to, or how do you see the industry evolving?
Sure, yeah. So I think as I kind of loosely touched upon, the briefs that we get from clients now are completely different to the ones that we used to get 5-10 years ago. I think the pandemic has obviously opened up a whole bunch of other doors that weren't considered, or probably should have been considered but weren't considered. So people's expectations of what the workplace needs to offer has changed completely. And I think actually what we're seeing now more than ever is much deeper engagement, much more alignment to brand, much more alignment to mission, strategy, purpose, beyond just kind of here's a nice space. What we often say to clients is a nice space is almost just a given. Like you will get that no matter what. But actually, that's not what we judge success against. We judge success against some much more deeper factors around actually what's it doing in terms of productivity, what's it doing for your bottom line, how engaged are your employees, how strong are the relationships between your teams. So actually I think the role of the designer is changing hugely, especially now more than ever. And I can see this in I do a lot of mentoring, and I'm starting to kind of see the questions that some of my mentees are asking me around actually, where's my role going to go in the future? And I guess the advice I'm kind of giving them is that I don't believe design is about aesthetics. I believe it's about inspiring change.
Sure.
And actually, that should be your role. So that should be your frame of thinking.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of layers in that. When you think of how you would do it 5 years ago, like you said, how does that work in your space, Emily? When all those layers come together, do you separate them and digest them individually, or?
Yeah, well, I think it's the way I suppose that influences my role and the questions we ask is that it has just become a lot more complex, and I think there's a challenge there in terms of, we are quite used to workplace consultancy. Used to be, there's always been a sort of complexity to it, but as Deepak said, there are so many more variables now, and I think obviously the one we fixate on is hybrid work, but actually there is so much more than that. People are coming to us with, one of the key first things we try and determine is what does success mean, how are we going to measure that, but actually that can be so many things. The workplace is really becoming a vehicle for change, and that can be so many things, whether that is employee experience, whether that is really living and breathing your ESG values. So I think in terms of how that sort of impacted our role, I'd say it's harder because we are quite used to sort of project managers often say, right, you've got this allocated amount of time, and actually we have a lot more questions to ask up front, I would say, and we follow a fairly sort of a fairly routine process, and it really centres around asking why at the start, and but that has become a lot longer in its process, really delving deep rather than sort of saying, just what do you want. It's really understanding, okay, let's make that why really clear, and then actually the what should kind of fall out of that if you do it sort of well enough, really.
Yeah, sure.
I'd say.
Okay.
I think just following on from that, so I was having a conversation with someone yesterday around AI, slightly unrelated, but I think, and I feel like I've had this sense for a little while, but I think traditional workplace strategy has got a limited shelf life, because typically you're capturing a brief at a moment in time. It's wherever that client is at that given time. And yes, there might be some forward thinking and some growth projections, but it's only going to be limited thinking, and you don't know that's actually going to happen. Like, most HR directors can't tell us their headcount in 5 years' time. So actually, I think there's going to be a shift. All the hard metrics will be done by AI. It's easy. I think where the designer's role will then change is how do you offer almost perpetual feedback. So, once you've done your design, how do you know what's a success and what's not? How do you constantly have kind of check-ins with a client and be able to adapt to space to suit them? Because, their teams might change. They might change the way they work. They might move teams around, and therefore this area doesn't suit the new team anymore. So I think the idea of a designer's role is almost more of a kind of relationship manager type role, rather than I'm going to give you a strategy, it's going to give you all your answers.
And I think the difficulty on that is that AI, as you said, will do a lot of that for us. I think headspace-wise, we need it to enable us to actually develop that sort of relationship and sort of really truly understand and sort of immerse ourselves into our client's world. But actually, in some ways, I'm finding it's not quite there yet. So we're trying to do both. And it's actually, trying to do all that. You're still having to do quite a lot of that sort of data analysis in a fairly manual way. I mean, not least because of sort of data protection and things. We can't start chucking things into, systems that are going to, take that data. So there's hopefully in time we can spend even more of our time on that sort of relationship building and just utilising that data in terms of what that means for the output. But at the moment it's still quite.
So when you say AI is going to kind of do a lot of it, do you mean like for gathering the data? For the brief of the design?
And ongoing. I mean, I think that's sort of two things really. Absolutely, in terms of it should input into building that brief, but also as Dee said, it becomes a sort of continuous feedback loop. If we can have systems in place that are continuously feeding back, we can then evolve that sort of design. And a lot of the clients that we work with currently are clients who come back to us. We do a lot of kind of repeat business, and I think that is because if we build that sort of that kind of relationship, if they come across something, and hybrid work has been obviously a key thing of that, people are coming back to us and saying, we love the space, but actually fundamentally the way we work has now changed. How do we then feed that new information back into the system and readapt either the ways of working or the space to actually sort of influence to sort of support that?
Yeah. Okay.
But that can be a lot faster if we're not having to go and do things like walking around, utilisation study, sort of typical ways that we would use.
Yeah, it does make me nervous with the AI because I don't know enough about it. But it's also kind of feels like that you're losing the personal touch, you're losing your like involvement and your kind of connectivity with the people you're designing for. Like you're just trusting the data you're getting, but you're not getting involved personally, or is it?
I disagree because I think you've got to have both. And David Schreier wrote a great book called Basic AI, which if you've not read, you should read it. But it's all on his whole stances. Where we really leverage, and this is, we're not supposed to be having a conversation on AI, so I'll keep it short. But
it's relevant.
It is relevant. Yeah, the whole thing is actually the real power of AI is when you start to combine human and AI.
Okay.
So actually, what is that? What's the intangible stuff which isn't metric? So it's almost the I always get mixed up. Quantitative stuff will be done by AI, but the qualitative stuff needs to be a conversation.
Okay.
It needs to be, well, what aren't you telling me that the AI is not picking up? Because there's always that element of a conversation. So I think it's the combination of both.
Okay.
And I think it's actually just, it allows the space and time for that sort of conversation. I think the difficulty, and this comes down to sort of challenges in sort of brief building, is that our time with the right people is so precious that actually if you can not have to use that to do a lot of this sort of quantitative, even qualitative, even just getting that data that's feeding into that sort of conversation, you can spend that time having really open, honest conversations about what is actually going to deliver the workspace that is going to reflect your actual drivers, your actual mission and your vision. So I think it allows that space.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So does that lead into a sort of a challenge and a scope of work being more of a storytelling type of environment where you've changed what you did previously to more of a journey?
Yeah, I think the storytelling element is huge for me. I think this has got to be a very prominent piece of the designer's toolkit.
Okay.
And I've seen this all the time. Like, I'm not a sustainability expert, but I speak to a lot of people in the sustainability world, and one of the biggest challenges we face as a society is people can't visualise a better future, and therefore they don't know how to act towards that.
Yeah.
And actually, as designers, we've got a perfect skill set to help people visualise what a better
Another
future
layer.
looks like.
Yeah.
So actually, that storytelling element becomes massive. So when we work with a lot of clients, especially on their sustainability agenda, we'll be doing all the stuff that they've committed to, whether it's accreditation or, the right type of material choices. But that sits at the facilities level. The general employees don't really know that. They don't understand that. So actually bringing it to life through storytelling is where you really get that kind of domino effect of, oh, the company I work for are taking this really seriously. Maybe I should start taking this really seriously. So I think the right type of storytelling can be incredibly powerful.
And the storytelling would go into the well-being, the culture. It's multi-layered or just simple aesthetics? That's what you're getting?
No, I think it has to be kind of all-encompassing.
Okay.
Because again, people typically want to know what they're getting out of something.
Sure. Return on investment.
Exactly.
It has to look great, but also really it has to feel great when you're in the space. You know what I mean? People want to see, like, they want to walk into a space and feel where you've put the research in it and where it's come from, and it relates to them. That so it has to, the story has to be in the whole design.
Yeah.
And also, I think we as people we feel more connected, or we feel it's called something. Can't remember the terminology right now, but we value things more highly if we feel a sense of ownership over them. So I think if you can sort of storytell as you're going through the process and actually make people feel part of that story that's being built, because it is being built as you sort of do this consultancy process right through to the kind of design, you are sort of, I like to think of it as like taking a bit of a tangled, web of ideas, opportunities, constraints, and actually, ironing that out into some kind of sort of understandable, inspiring story. Yeah. If you can get people involved in that as you go,
collaborating and kind of...
Yeah, then they're going to feel a sort of sense of ownership as well, and actually sort of buy into what you're designing.
Story alongside the data to get aesthetics and obviously your well-being, everything. Yeah.
I mean, it's a hackneyed term, but taking people on the journey still works, right? So actually, still actually making sure that you are engaging with the right people, and if you really want buy-in, don't give people something. You've got to take them along the way.
Yeah.
Sort of need to extract what that means, taking them on a journey, because that could be used so lightly.
Yeah.
But it's quite meaningful.
But also, I do think, there's the storytelling element to it, and then I think there's also the sort of listening element to it. It kind of goes both ways, and I think this is becoming more and more important. On a complete side note, I'm currently doing I'm trained to be a counsellor alongside my consultancy work, and I see so many parallels in the way that I do my work now as to the skills that I'm learning in that. And I think what I'm finding is that often in the work I do, we all do, is, I mean, in counselling, it's like the sort of presenting problem. What do people come to you with the, what the issue is? And I think we often hear that in our sort of work as well. They come and say, the typical one is like the coffee isn't good enough, right? We hear that again and again. And we've had that with it's a classic that will never sort of go away. Yeah, the coffee, I haven't tried it, but I'll take your word for it. But we had we had that with a client recently, and that was what came again and again and again. And I think this sort of, immediate response to that is, right, great, we'll put new coffee machines in, done. But actually, when we started asking a little bit further into that, it turned out that it was actually about equity of experience. So fee earner spaces had brilliant coffee, other spaces didn't. So actually, when we really started asking and listening to what people were saying about that and going deeper than that kind of presenting problem, we understood that it was more of an issue of how valued people felt, right? And then you start thinking, once you've got that as your initial kind of, right, this is what we're trying to
peel back the aesthetics, and that's what you're addressing.
Exactly, and then what comes out of that is going to be something so much greater, and probably with much better storytelling naturally from it. Than just going, we heard you want coffee, we've given you coffee.
Yeah,
it
you're
becomes
future-proofing that.
Yeah, well, just it becomes, then it does start to tie in. Okay, what are we trying to say as a company about how we value our employees? Coffee is part of that, but actually suddenly there's a great story behind that.
Yeah, and that's just one element, because some companies do more than just coffee. Yeah.
Yes.
You would have found that.
Yes,
absolutely.
but even things, and this is a bugbear of mine, but collaboration spaces. I'm always banging on about them, but if the amount of workshops that I do, and you say to people, right, what do you want, or what do you want people coming back to the office for? We want people to come back in so that we can collaborate. And you go, okay, why? And they kind of go, so we can work together, obviously. And you go, okay, why is that important to work together? Oh, we feel, we're feeling like we're missing those kind of water cooler moments. We're missing the banter. We're missing the, okay, right, why is that important to you? Well, it's important that we have a sort of connection as a team. Okay, well, again, once you've got to that route, then is a collaboration space going to solve that? Probably not. Actually, something that might do it more is looking at your rhythms of how you work as a team and sort of working out, okay, and then what spaces are going to support that. So I think it's really sort of challenging that initial thing that you hear. And I use collaboration space just because we hear it so often, and actually the amount of times I've gone to sites and there are so many collaborative spaces and they're just sitting there gathering dust.
Yeah, sure.
Because actually the ways of working aren't supporting that.
Sure.
The culture isn't supporting that.
Is that the remote working also fighting against it, or trying to be the magnet to bring it in, but it doesn't work like a magnet?
Exactly. I just think the term collaboration is so widely used, but actually that can mean a number of different things. Is that about connection? It might well be about collaboration, but actually the way that you're collaborating, what are you doing when you're collaborating? Is it an exchange of information? Is it actual sort of sharing of ideas? Really understanding that, and then it's right. Okay, what's the space that's going to serve that best? Do we need technology in it? Do we need connect? It's all these things, and I don't think you can really build a brief of what that space can do unless you're really truly understanding the drivers behind it.
Sure. I think we're seeing this a lot with clients at the moment, where they're coming to us with what they believe is a design challenge. And when you start to ask that really important question of why, you realise it's a cultural challenge. That's what they're trying to fix. And giving them a design challenge might, good coffee might attract some people back for 2 weeks, but after that they're going to lose interest. So you haven't really sorted the problem. So really kind of, I think asking why is the most powerful thing you can possibly do.
Yeah.
And keep asking it until they give you the
absolutely.
truth.
Yeah.
Keep going till they're really uncomfortable.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah.
feel like torture.
Interesting point on the cultural side of it, Deepak. Sort of, how do you understand people in designing a space with a cultural element? And has that changed in the last sort of 2-3 years? And do you see it changing again, working alongside sort of AI or design?
Yeah, I mean, I think culture has been put on steroids now. It has to be, because for me, I think the spaces that we design that are very active, where we've got high occupancy, the space is doing 40% of that, but it's really because they've gone through some kind of cultural change. And actually, culture is really what's holding companies together.
So I can't just design a beautiful space and expect the culture to follow.
No, unfortunately not. Nice space and good coffee only does part of the problem. So actually, really digging down into, well, what are the kind of totems for your culture? Like, what does everyone absolutely protect? And then understanding kinds of needs and motivations of employees. So I keep hearing lots of stuff around, employees have got too much power now, why isn't it like it used to be? And there's a lot of kind of, let's try and get back to what we feel safe in. And people are doing it out of fear, right? We're not going to go back to the way it was. So you've got to accept that and be able to understand, well, what's going to attract the top talent for you? And if that goes against your current culture, are they right for you? Do you change your culture? So you've got to ask some really difficult questions. And I think this is where, having direct access to, as a client, not just the real estate team or the facilities team, but having direct access to the C-suite, the head of people, the head of culture, some of these roles that didn't even exist like 3 or 4 years ago, actually being able to kind of speak to those guys around, where are you now? Where do you want to go to? And actually, how can we make the space an enabler to get to your kind of ideal culture?
Yeah, sort of want to unlock that culture in the environment. Paired up with the design. Yeah, fair enough, 100%. Tracy, have you found? Sorry,
Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat.
So Tracy designed our showroom. Have you found when designing culture to be something forgotten or a driving force? Or?
No, it's quite a driving force. Yeah, definitely. You want to design a space, obviously, to look beautiful and be beautiful, but you want to make the people who work in the space feel comfortable. You'll have all sorts of different people, like in a team. We have a small team, so it's quite easy for me to do. Not easy, but I'm involved in, and I can see the different personalities and how they work. And some people like a quiet area, some people like to be involved in an area. So, considering people's culture and how they work things is massive. Yeah, it's a really big deal.
Yeah, amazing. Because it's obviously quite a calm space, really ideal for your showroom space and environment, but I was quite fascinated when it all came together, how the culture organically just grew and it thrived.
Yeah, totally. From what we were a couple of years ago, it's massively changed.
Absolutely.
And
which is
design is
peeling the aesthetics back to say there's more than just aesthetics on it. Yeah. So when does a successful space build a culture? That's probably more MCM's main game. When does a successful space build a culture and thrive?
Can I say when it doesn't?
Yeah, wrong answers only. Sure.
No, all I was going to say is that I think it's if you're trying to use a successful space, whatever, we can talk about what success means.
Yeah,
but anyway,
what does that mean?
If you're trying to build a successful space to put a plaster on a broken culture, I think that's the difficulty, is when, and I think we talk a lot about sort of, getting the basics right. And, but I think, we all have a negativity bias. So, and I think the risk in trying to build a space to go, right, okay, this will cover up all the crap that's sort of manifesting in our culture, is that the negativity bias says that people will cling on to the things that still aren't working, and actually it will probably negate everything that you've done in that space. So unless so for instance, whether it's you have a really bad meeting culture, whether it's that you have just quite a sort of, any kind of toxicity, it's not a diverse culture, all these things, if you're trying to create a space that kind of, you're saying, right, that'll sort all that out, people aren't going to, they're probably even going to focus more on the negatives, because they're kind of going, right, why are you doing that when this is where the real problem is? Spend your time here.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I also think, for some, I'm trying to think about two really successful projects. Let's take Diageo. So Diageo are one of our clients. We just designed their London HQ. So hugely successful project. It's a massive move from them. So they moved from Acton, probably double the amount of size to what they have now.
Yeah.
So they reduced their size, but really part of the brief is very much around what is the experience we're trying to create, right?
Sure.
It wasn't what's the design or what kind of facilities. It was very much focused around what's the experience we want employees and people walking through this building to feel.
Sure.
And it's very aligned to kind of this understanding of who they are as a brand.
Okay.
So what they take seriously as a brand. And actually, I think that was a real change in how we approach the design of the space.
Okay, interesting.
And we find this a lot with kind of external facing clients understand the power of brand.
Okay.
Whereas when you're talking to like legal firms who aren't quite as external, they don't quite understand what you're talking about.
Sure.
So, you know, a really simple thing. So, and this kind of goes back to storytelling. So we created a huge staircase in Diageo and we worked with a local artist to etch the story of, they called it From Grain to Glass. And it's basically the story of how you get from grain to a drink.
Sure.
Into this huge 4-story staircase. And it was a really, I mean, it wasn't a simple thing, but it sounds like a really simple thing. But immediately, like people at work, they got it and they understood why it was there. They understood how it connected to the brand that they worked for.
Sure.
And it kind of created a sense of pride within the business and the people walking into that space.
Yeah.
And that then is, I think, is a good example of how a space can trigger is a trigger point for kind of cultural pride or cultural change.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just that. Obviously, you know, they had this whole floor dedicated to wellness. So, that was one of their key pillars. Is a highly sustainable building. They do a lot of sensor tracking, so they really kind of track, you know, which spaces are being used, which aren't.
Okay,
so they're very. It's a very high tech space in that kind of sense. But I think they haven't lost the essence of what they were trying to do at the beginning and what they wanted the space to do, you know, knowing that they were going to go into a smaller space. They knew that they had to double down on almost everything else to make it a successful space and make it align into their kind of the culture they wanted to create. So they've now got the opposite problem. They've got they're turning people away from coming in because there's so many people who want to be in the building.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good problem
I guess,
to have.
yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's what success would look like. Any other sort of examples of what a success in an office space could look like?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would you say that all those negative people that you convert, that would be a success?
All the
If
negative.
you think about it,
Yes.
people just hate change.
Yes.
So, but then they would just come in and still pick on stuff, even though they've gone from a really horrible building into a beautiful space that functions
Yeah.
brilliantly. But if you can convert them, they
Absolutely.
can start spreading the word. So they become your champion.
Yeah.
So it could be as small as that one person who's a negative.
Yeah.
That can turn it into
100%. You're sorry to. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, 100%. And I think actually we had a project recently where we did a bit of a kind of pilot space. And as much as space was a part of it, the space that we designed, you know, hands up, I wouldn't say was anything particularly out there. It was really built around function. So we decided the behaviours we were wanting to trial. The space was built to kind of support that. And actually we purposefully, as uncomfortable as it made me feel, we purposefully looked for people who were really against it to be part of that group of to kind of experience the pilot, kind of thinking, oh God, I hope the hypothesis around this goes well. Exactly. But you're right, and it did mean that there were many uncomfortable conversations where, you know, these kind of individuals would come to us and say, I really don't like how this is working. But if we could listen to them and find their pain points and respond to them, and that's the beauty of a pilot, respond to them, then actually we're getting those people on board. And I think exactly that, you know, using that space to almost have some of those difficult conversations can also start to create, you know, from a cultural point of view, a bit more of an open, sort of honest, transparent kind of dialogue between people as well, right? So we actually started having, in this group, we had real naysayers and we had people who were really up for it. And we encouraged a lot of conversations between them.
Nice.
So rather than us, you know, we were really very much there to kind of facilitate the conversations. And a lot of it was around how space was used, right? You know, because I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot. What are the etiquettes around how we use space? Let's almost come to a mutual agreement. We're all adults. We're all using the space together, you know, and it can be as simple as this is a space we can make noise. This isn't. Good point.
It doesn't
On cue. On cue.
Yeah, is that a concur or is that I lost my train of thought. But yeah, absolutely. And I think that was probably the the key successes of that was actually one of the main naysayers then became, as you said, a kind of champion for it. Yes, he still had things that he was quite open and honest about. I don't like this, but then we could build in choice for for them and kind of say, right, well, perhaps we can use this space a little bit differently. Does that meet your needs more?
I also think that I think pilot's a great idea, and I think all office spaces should be a pilot, but it's also making it a continuous pilot, because you might just catch someone on a really bad day, right, and they may give you some really terrible feedback, but you might catch them the week after and everything's changed and jolly. So being able to kind of create that loop, that feedback loop, I think is also important, and being able to kind of have that continuous pilot, because I think going back to what you said, Emmett, the number one reason I hear around why people are coming into the office is community, right? When you break it all down, it's like, we just want to feel part of a community. And so anything you can do to facilitate that generally means that actually people will perceive it in quite a good way.
They'll thrive,
and I think not everyone is going to love everything, right?
No, sure.
That's just a simple fact.
That's life,
But actually, if you can tell the story of why you've made certain decisions, if you can facilitate the opportunity for people to come together more and celebrate, then actually, most people will go, oh, this is doing the job it should do.
Okay, so some of the journey is to get some real tough questions out the way.
Absolutely.
That's going to be hard, isn't it?
You have to do it, and some people don't. Yeah, people don't tend to like it, and I think you said, Dee, a little while ago about having conversations with kind of C-suite and really getting those kind of people in the room. And I think half of the battle is still getting people to understand the importance of having those conversations. People think, oh, I don't need to be here. Well, let's send sort of facilities, and they can do that. They know what we need. But actually, it's trying to get people to understand. We really need you to buy into it, because this is so much more than your workspace. Your workspace is almost one of the what's at the end of the reasoning why you're doing it. Sure. Out of that should come a workspace that kind of supports your culture.
And we don't allow enough time for that at the moment.
No.
We spend 4 weeks doing kind of data gathering and then an hour with the CEO. And it should be the other way around. We should have 4 weeks of continuous conversations with the C-suite, and hopefully condense all of that data gathering into a short period of time. So I think at some point, and this is where I think AI will come in, hopefully that flip will happen where you're having conversations.
It allows more time.
Much more rather than just spending all that time, as Em said, who's using this space, how many people are in, blah, 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 blah.
And of course it's precious time. Sorry.
Hi, I wanted to ask, when I'm seeing not just the building but also the interiors, the last few years there's a move about making the buildings smart, the materials inside smart. And then we're also talking about sustainability. So my question is, imagine, 5 years time, where we've got these smart buildings, we've got these smart materials, we've got sensors everywhere, and then something breaks. Not like before, where it breaks and then you just go to the local skivvy and he fixes it for you. But he breaks in the sense that you now have to actually look at, where did this part come from, which is circuiting the whole building. Without that part, that micro part, you're not able to function the building. So when I'm seeing smart buildings which are reliant on materials which are from 3,000 miles away, extracting materials, I'm thinking, are they smart, or actually are they stupid buildings? Because we've made ourselves more reliant on countries which in the last 12 months, they're waking up and actually saying, hold on a second, we own most of the resources. We're not even getting a fair price. And this whole sustainability gambit is based on the price of the raw materials, or the raw materials being sold, for example, by a country in Africa at the raw material price. The message now of countries in Africa actually saying, we're not going to sell it raw material price. We're going to sell it basis on, we're going to start making in Africa. You're going to have to pay a lot more for this product. So my question is in an effort to be sustainable, should we be looking at buildings which are not looking at the external additions to a building, which you have to maintain more. Like you've got AC, you've got solar panels, and actually looking at materials which are naturally a part of the building. Like you can still use concrete and steel, or you can start maybe looking at other materials which are natural plant-based materials like hemp, like bamboo, like straw, because when they become a part of the building, the fabric of the building rather than an attachment, you don't have to maintain them. That's petrified over time, and that's naturally breathable. But with the thing we have at the moment, we have to actually think, okay, we put it up, maybe 5 years' time, you're going to come at a roadblock thinking, oh, this material is not available in Scotland. You have to get it from somewhere else. So how sustainable is this if the materials are not onshore? They're actually more offshore than we actually intended.
You're talking about sustainability in a globalised world, and that is a model we currently work in. Until someone changes that model, that's going to continue to happen that way. So, you know, until we stop thinking about globalisation in its current sense, we'd always be have to ship materials from elsewhere. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. I think something really interesting, kind of related. Your point about bamboo was, I was reading something recently around biomimicry, right? So the principles of biomimicry are around looking to nature for better solutions. So breathable materials rather than looking at kind of, you know, something really extractive. And actually the point, which I hadn't really thought about before, was, you know, biomimicry isn't about something looking like nature. It's about performing like nature. So actually it becomes a regenerative building when you look at something. So, you know, the air that comes out of that building is cleaner than the air that goes into it. The water is cleaner than when it first went in there. So actually, I think if we could utilise some of those principles in our design thinking, we might be able to find much more localised material choices, I think. But that's going to take system change.
Huge shift.
But that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you've got a building which is, this isn't a new solution, this is hundreds of years old, which is not looking at bamboo, which is you have to get it from China.
Yeah.
Look at hemp, industrial hemp, which I've been saying for the last 10 years. Most people are going to conflict as something else. You've got a material which is being shown to petrify over time, so it's getting stronger. It's naturally breathable, so it's good internally inside here. And it's also shown that whatever the pollution is outside, I've seen studies where this building is so petrifying, it's capturing naturally the pollution in the air, just like when the plant is growing. That in itself is actually omitting most of the operational costs that you'd have to maintain in a building. Now, I understand it might take time, but again, the roadblock we're meeting in the next 5 years, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, over the next 5-10 years, are going to be proclaiming back their interest of the resources that we rely on. Are we going to be so naive that, this is going to take time, but one day these countries say, all right, not 10p in the pound, it's going to be 50p.
Yeah. I agree with you, to be honest. I think that we will come to that challenge. And I think unless you go through like serious systemic change around where we buy goods from, that will always be the case. Like, you know, I do think there's definitely a movement towards looking at more localized material. Like, it's slowly happening. It's not happening at the rate it needs to happen, but it is happening in certain areas. You know, hemp, I'm seeing much more hemp on the market than I've ever done before. So you're starting to see that kind of more localized material come onto the market, and let's hope it continues. But it's not going to have the impact you're talking about needs to happen at scale. So that's going to take regulation. That's going to take someone like the government saying, we're no longer going to buy in these materials outside of the country, therefore we have to find other alternatives. That's regulation change, and that's way beyond my pay grade.
But it's the right kind of conversation to be having.
Yeah, it does, and I think consumer habit can affect it. But again, it's going to take educated tenants to ask for educated buildings from educated landlords. It's a knock-on effect, which is why I think coming full circle on this, again, I'm a big believer in kind of the ripple effect. And if you can start to change mindsets at one thing, you suddenly get employers that put pressure on their employer, who then put pressure on
To build the
their
culture.
landlords, who then put pressure on. So suddenly you start to get a kind of knock-on effect for what people are asking for. And you're seeing it now. You know, the regulations around sustainability, I do believe a lot of that is coming from consumer pressure.
Yeah, consistency as well.
Lady over here has a question.
Kind of going on that, excuse me, question, what you just said, how, obviously it's very important that employers are getting their employees involved in the design process, but how often does that happen? I don't know. So it's actually like, because if you want to get the negative ones that can't see the change, if they're getting on board with, well, you've actually helped create the space and functionality, is that happening or is it not happening enough?
Yeah, as you said, not enough. So I think in terms of if you're doing like a typical, say, 6 to 8 week sort of consultancy period, it can't really happen. You know, we will do our best to have some kind of, you know, user group kind of representation, but is that enough to have that sort of proper dialogue? No. I think that we know we tend to use that more as a sense check, and I don't think that's really enough. I think it is these projects who are bringing us on. They're bringing consultancy throughout the process, so even sort of just carrying on through stage 2, stage 3, and actually if the design is designed to be flexible in its nature, then we can continue learning. You know, there's nothing to say our learning has to stop once stage 1 finishes. So I think it really is those clients who are taking the plunge and being a bit braver and investing, because it is, you know, it is an investment to have, you know, a consultant working with you for a long period of time. But I think, you know, recent clients who have done that have really fed back the value of that. And actually it's been, you know, some of those are ones who've come to us, as Dee said, with a design problem. And actually we through conversation have, you know, it's not a sales pitch, but we've just said, I really think it would be valuable for us to really work more closely with your people. And that's what they found the value in. It's almost like, you know, the space, as you said, it's beautiful, people love it. But that's almost like a bonus, you know, it's actually functioning. People feel a real connection and they feel heard. I think that's the thing, you know. I don't think people feel heard in surveys anymore. You know, a survey is a tool and it can be really useful if you do it well and concisely and think about what you're asking and how you're going to use it. But actually people value, I think people value real proper conversation.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I think this is quite a tricky area as well for the future. I mean, I'm reading about tech that measures, you know, how good a conversation is between individuals, how, you know, and also like what my body language is by my tone of voice. So suddenly you get into a whole world
scary.
of like, people are gathering so much data.
Telling me something.
I know. So yeah, it could get very scary very quickly. And I think, you know, nothing beats that kind of, I'm not sure it gets to the kind of crux of the challenge like it would when you just talk face to face with a CEO and be like, tell me the real challenge you're trying to solve here. It's not you want a night in your office. It goes deeper than that. What is it?
Yeah.
So actually that's the power of the conversation.
Words on a paper sometimes that doesn't sink into me. I see it, I don't see the person. I need to see their eyes, I need to see their reaction to things. I think sometimes just I sound old school. I sound really old school. But that's what I feel
think
like.
the world hasn't had a lot of that.
Yeah.
COVID has happened. The world wins through change, and it's adapting now.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is storytelling.
Yeah, totally.
That storytelling makes it personal, makes it your journey, makes it their journey, and that gets the buy-in. And once the buy-in's there, I feel everyone's sort of on a two-way street.
Yeah.
Some of our best engagement recently was with like groups of, they were all department heads, and we basically got them together on like a weekly, I think, or bi-weekly basis, and it almost felt like a group therapy session. Like we literally we sat, but you know, we were kind of facilitators, and suddenly all this stuff was coming out about how they work together, you know, and they started, you know, we watched it kind of happen. They started having these conversations which really enabled them to work together cross team as well. And it's this stuff that, you know, we try and push with space. So let's push cross cross collaboration
Yeah,
by putting spaces in between,
Spit it out.
departments. But actually, what really was valuable in that was just enabling them to have some of these. I mean, again, that sounds a bit sort of condescending. They're adults, but I think actually, unless you're given the space to have those
And all
conversations,
the opportunity, actually.
exactly.
Yeah.
People don't. They've got busy lives. They've got work to do.
Yeah.
So I think that was a kind of really valuable
Yeah.
thing we had. Yeah.
Yeah, that, going back to your initial question about the role of designer, I think facilitation is
Yeah.
a critical skill.
Yeah.
And not something you get taught
Yeah.
in education, as far as
Sure.
I'm aware.
Fair enough.
It's really only something you start to learn when you're out there. Is like, how do you hold space for a really
Sure.
deep conversation? How do you
Absolutely.
practice deep listening? Like,
Yeah.
actually, some of the things that you were talking about, I really think that is it's a real skill that has to be taught for
Sure.
designers.
Something to feed back
Totally.
to this sort of university level as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Can understand that. Right. Any other questions? No? That's proper silence, isn't it? Yeah. Nice. Any other additional thoughts, Deepak, Emily, Tracy? Anything we've touched on that you want to expand on further, or?
One thing I thought when I was sort of thinking about this topic of conversation, and just sort of my thoughts around, not just a pretty space and what does that mean, was I think, again, something that I'm seeing that I feel is a natural way of doing things, but isn't almost makes our jobs more complicated, is design has almost become a bit of a shopping list of like, I've seen this here, I've seen Bloomberg's office, and I want that, and I want this, I want this. They've got a gym, I want that. Let's make sure our space, let's fill it with plants because we want to show that we're a sort of sustainable company. And for want of a much, much better analogy, because this is truly shocking, I thought to me, it felt like making a cake, right? So almost the way that I see people doing it is they're getting all their ingredients from their cupboard, and they're going, right, what can I make from it? Let's just chuck it all in. Let's chuck in everything. When actually the way you want to be doing it is really thinking about, right, what am I trying to make here? What's the end goal, and what are the ingredients? And that might not always mean that you need to have a space that, just because everyone else is doing a space that's full of whatever, that you need that. Does that respond to the brief? To use my awful analogy again, if I'm trying to make a Victoria sponge cake, I might love chocolate, but it doesn't go in there,
Sure.
So I think trying to, if anyone's got a better one, please let me know. But like, I think that's, it can feel overwhelming is probably my point.
Yeah.
At the start of a kind of design brief, when you're kind of going, all these things we could do, we could do this. But actually, again, those are the sort of final solutions, and they will only make sense if they are coming from
Sure.
a real clear vision of what it is
What
that
are
you're
we trying
trying
to
to
do?
achieve.
Yeah.
Like, less is more in that sense, I think. Do those small things that meet the brief really well.
Give you,
Avoid all the other noise.
Yeah, we can do everything.
Yeah.
But
We
what
can
do you
everything.
want?
Exactly.
You don't want everything. You want something. What is that something?
And what that ends up creating is probably more stuff than you need,
Yeah.
often more space than you need.
2 collab areas.
It's not even what do you want, it's why do you want it.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's kind of
Yeah.
a question you've got to be asking.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I agree. I think it's a good analogy.
But you've got to
you.
extract an
Thanks.
honest answer.
I
You've got to
got there eventually.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll draw a picture next time.
Exactly.
It'll make more sense.
But look, I think my main takeaway is we're talking more and more to clients around whole ways of working, right? And that goes beyond just when they're in the office.
Sure.
Like, people like in a hybrid working model, people only spend about 40% of their time in the office. So if we're talking about designing work, the act of work for people, we're only affecting 40% of that.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So actually, how do you look at the whole ways of working and think around, let's loop in culture, let's look at policy, let's look at the home working situation. Suddenly you start to actually think, well, we can have a much bigger impact on how successful this workforce is, or this culture is delivering on this workforce by thinking much broader around whole ways of working.
Yeah.
So I think, there's lots of conversations around smart working that are coming to the fore. I think that's inevitable. I think it's inevitable we'll get to a 4-day week, probably in the next year or two.
Sure.
So actually starting to think about, how do we loop some of those future challenges into the conversation
incorporate
now?
it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nice.
Me, from this, I've just taken that I need to up my game on AI. I need to get the name of that book and open my mind. Yeah, from that, that's about it.
Yeah.
It's a good place to start. You get lost and you're probably slightly depressed.
I'm really interested in it. I have to, I'm really interested in it, but don't know enough. Yeah.
I found it really interesting, just quickly what you said earlier about designing this space and sort of knowing the personalities. So I think that is something, so on a complete side note, that is something that I think is really, you know, like you said, on a small scale, you can know those people, but how do you do that on a larger scale? We've tried, people try many different ways of doing, you know, can you create sort of personas?
I posed that question to you when we first met, and you were saying like you do kind of surveys, but then you also do the listening thing you were saying as well, the machine that listens to everything.
We don't do that.
Not yet.
Not yet. But the personality and the talking to people and understanding how they work and introverts, extroverts, and the whole thing. That's kind of the main story, I think, would be the best design you get out of that.
Yeah, and like personas are actually really hard, you know, to try and bucket people like that.
No, you don't know someone until
just
a few years down the line. So if you're only meeting them for an hour, I don't know how you...
It's a time game.
Don't you think that this is also changing the way design is changing the way work works, basically, how well the management knows their people, because you won't be able to go deep into knowing every single person, but there are stages of management that should know the person. They should feed you that information eventually. So then this is eventually about choosing the right people for the right places, and also changing the status of the designer, because as you mentioned, facilitating, but also psychology. So it's not only about aesthetics, it's about the overall and more holistic approach now, which should be probably taught a bit more at unis. Because that's a completely different, sometimes misunderstanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel awful for management kind of like level. Just the, I think the role of a manager has become so difficult in terms of the amount that you have to take on. You know, I think there was a thing recently about, and I won't try and remember stats because I can't remember, but basically saying, you know, how many people that's their key driver for actually not being happy in work
that influential
is their manager. And it's, you know, that manager's got so much, they're trying to hold not only the team in terms of the business of the day, but also their team in a much more kind of holistic way as well, and trying to sort of understand. And I think that's almost too much of a role in some ways.
I think pressure for one person.
But I think this is I can see this fading out fairly quickly. I think the middle management role will disappear in the near future. I don't know if you've heard much about like hard power and soft power. Don't know if anyone has. Anyway, it's like, so, you know, hard power is our traditional model where you've got C-suite, middle managers, everyone else, and it's all based on dominance, right? So the people that will always make the most money are the guys at the top, right? Middle managers will make an okay salary, but it's never going to beat the C-suite, and it's a very small pool of people at the top. Like soft power, it would be an inverted triangle where actually you think about like servant leadership, where actually your job is to influence, it's not to manage. And therefore you put in a lot of power then in the top of the triangle, which is the biggest, which is your employees. So I think there's going to be a shift at some point. Again, it's a bit of a system change, and it will take a real challenge to the people that are trying to protect business as usual to make that change. But I think once we get there, and I suspect employees will make that decision for employers, where suddenly people were like, I don't want to go in at the bottom and work up a ladder. That's not the way I want to work. I want to be much more empowered to do what I believe in.
That's super interesting. I've read a book, Think Big, by Dr. Grace Lorden. You know of it? Yeah, super. I'd recommend that. It changes the psychology of a workspace. Like, throw away your job title. What do you want to do? Not do what your title says. What do you want to do as a person? Like, think big. I'd recommend, reading that. Really good.
And then I think to your point that almost would allow the kind of, you know, typical manager role to perhaps be more of a supportive role, and actually, you know, gives them more sort of capacity for that, because I think it is really crucial.
It's actually amazing because just yesterday I had drinks with my friends from one other big practice, and the funny thing is that whenever you're promoting people to a managerial position, you're promoting from among wherever they are doing, but actually managers, require completely different skills.
Yeah.
So whenever you're a brilliant designer, it doesn't mean that you'll be a brilliant manager.
Yeah.
And this may be not fair because you want to be promoted because you're so good in whatever you're doing, but then you won't be able to manage those people, and people will be going because they won't feel secure, and you won't understand their needs as well. So it's the same with, I was going to ask you actually, how do you go with clients that don't understand needs of their people? I had clients, because I'm also a designer, so I had clients telling me now that, no, I want you to do this. And I said, oh, that's actually impossible. You should be thinking this way. No, I'm paying. It's like, okay, cool. So how would you use your clients this way also? Because that will not allow you to fully do your project if you have a client like that, and fully do the space as you want.
Yeah, I mean, one of the tools that we often use, and it doesn't work for everyone, but I think ego plays a massive part in that conversation. When someone says, no, but I want this, immediately the project is something that they're owning, and it's not about the company they work for or the brand or anything. So something that we often do in our visioning sessions is take that ego out of it altogether, like move it away from the I and move it into, actually, this project is for your business. It's not for you, it's not for the CEO, it belongs to the business. So what does the business need? And I think getting them to have that mindset shift is often quite difficult, and not everyone gets it. But those that do will be super, like, they'll just empower you. I had it with an insurance client recently where the founder, the CEO, once we had that conversation and he understood it, it was almost like free rein. He's like, you've got my full trust to go and deliver, because I fully believe that actually all decisions we're going to make are going to be in the interest of the business going forward. And it was almost like he didn't care, like he didn't matter. I mean, he did care, obviously, he was paying for it. But actually, that trust was built by taking it away from him as an individual. So,
and also getting people in a room together, because I think people, if you can have it so people are listening to each other, I think people feel less inclined. Whereas if it's a one-to-one, people can be quite sort of, it all comes from I. Whereas when you can speak together, you encourage that sort of conversation and challenge. And and I think it's about setting the scene, like you said. We're encouraging challenge here. We're encouraging open conversation. It's not about being right or wrong. And I think if you can set the scene like that and have that group conversation, that can.
You sometimes need both, because some people feel too say in a bigger group. And they'd rather come to you and go, actually, I think the coffee's terrible, this is great. Actually, this person is my team. So it does become more of a cultural thing.
But also you could still do like accountability groups, which are quite powerful. So have individuals set their goals, but hold each other accountable for the decision they're going to make. So again, actually, it starts to become really powerful, because they're almost doing your work for you. They're holding each other accountable to it. But why are we making that decision? Like, everyone hates that, but because we said this.
Challenge it.
Something. Was there a last question somewhere out there?
As we're just coming on the back of the last 18 months of interest rates, inflation, because we've been there for 20 years, very good runnings. Now you're seeing the cost of materials rising, people wanting to get back into the office. But then as we go into recession, there's going to be job losses. There might be some inclining back to people saying, can't afford to come in the office, I want to go back home. But I want the environment, I want the atmosphere, I want the connection. So as we go into these fiscal conditions that we haven't experienced before for 20 years, and possibly a recession, how do you maintain it? Or is it, I don't know if it's the manager that needs to connect all these things together, because you could have the most cleanest natural materials for your environment, but how do you do that in an economic condition where you want to keep them in the loop of doing the work for the business, also at the same time knowing that the fiscal conditions for them on a personal level is probably going to change as well?
Are you asking, sorry, just to make sure I understand, so how do you encourage people to still be coming in if that's what you're wanting?
Not just coming in, but how do you actually keep the atmosphere positive, because we are going into fiscally different times. It's interest rates, inflation, we can't ignore that. We could up until 2020, but we can't anymore. So how do you actually maintain that? you've got the natural materials, everything's nice, but how do you maintain the atmosphere, whether they're working at home or in the office, and saying that this is another challenge now?
Yeah.
And is it to do with materials, or is it to do with something else, going back to the culture? But how do you maintain it in a completely new environment economically that we're going to be going to 2025?
Well, I think you have to. I mean, given the last 4 years, 4 years. You know, it would be silly not to design for something else happening. You know, whether that is the economic conditions, whether that is another sort of pandemic. I think you should be always designing in mind that sort of might fluctuate in terms of whether it becomes a sort of, people do happen to be working from home more, or they're in the office space more. So I think that's one part of that.
Yeah, but I guess I'm trying to understand what the question you're asking. So it's around, how do you keep positivity in the current climate? Is that what you're asking? How do you stay optimistic?
Yes, but also this also comes back to my earlier question, which is people are talking about ESGs.
Right.
People are talking about, okay, ESGs, you want ESGs, you have to get that sustainable product. You, in a more difficult economic climate, to go green, you're going to get that solar panel. That solar panel now, you're reliant on those materials from 3,000 miles away. Times are tough, your bank balance is shrinking. Do you spend that money on maintaining that product to make you green? Or do you actually invest it in fiscally difficult times on your staff because there is a recession coming? One is supposedly going to make you green, but it's actually making you more reliant on materials somewhere else. And the other one is actually really about serving the people. So this is what I'm going. I'm saying we're spending so much money to go green, but we're not looking at the real impacts of where those materials are coming from. We just got to go ESG, ESG, ESG.
Mm-hmm.
What's the cost? All these materials, you've got European general regulations coming out in the last 18 months. You will have to go all the way back to the point of extraction of where your products and materials come from.
Mm-hmm.
And that will include all your green technology, not just the building or the concrete and the cement. It's going to include every single renewable product.
Mm-hmm.
And if you then apply it, then you're in trouble, because you have to go somewhere in East Africa, somewhere in China. And you think, oh crap, there's human rights abuses littered across this whole supply chain, which is sold to me as green. I would have been better putting the money into my stuff.
I think you're mixing up slightly a point with sustainability, because sustainability is also about embodied energy, about transportation and stuff. So taking stuff from far away is actually not that sustainable. So whatever you're saying, it's more sustainable. But in terms of, I think this whole conversation was about keeping people happy during those times and having the impact on the people in a positive way. So even though I think there is a way of mixing sustainability and happiness together. This is how the general design should be.
Yeah, I
think cultural thing. If you make people feel safe in their environment, regardless of what's happening externally, then that's all
culture will
that
thrive.
matters.
Yeah.
And also, I do think I mean, there seems to be a thought that because of the way we're now working, you can automatically reduce space. I don't think that's always the case, but I do think there are certainly some opportunities for sort of reducing how much you're using in the first place, and potentially could some of that be sort of redistributed? I don't know, but I think there is a case in, if you, again, coming back to, if you can really understand what people are needing, then actually there's probably a lot of stuff you can sort of get rid of, and actually that may or may not also become a sort of reduction in space. So actually I think thinking about what you're using in the first place, and then thinking about, okay, how are we going to do it? What are the sort of materials? Where are they coming from? But I think sort of reducing first, there's sort of potential there.
Yeah, I know we've got to wrap up.
Yeah.
I want to leave everyone on a happy note. So I think I think it's more than ever, the role of the designer is incredibly important, right? We've got so many challenges coming our way. and people will look to us to have answers for them, and a lot of those answers we don't simply have. So actually it's a very exciting time. The world has been disrupted every single day. Actually, so you know, being open to and being curious about what's coming our way, but actually approaching it in a very hopeful and positive way is the way that I always go towards stuff. So have those deep conversations with clients, have those deep conversations with others in the industry. You know, I'm seeing some amazing industry-wide kind of initiatives, groups that are coming together from competitors to try and push the whole industry
happy
forward.
workplaces, absolutely.
More than I've ever seen before. So I think actually, you know, it's an exciting time. It's a positive time. I think kind of go out there and start
embrace the
asking
change.
why more. There you go.
Embrace the change.
Brave. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Good.
Cool.
That will wrap it up for today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
I think Emily and Deepak may stay around for a few minutes if you want to grab them, but they will be
Depends
heading
on
out.
how many pastries.
Yeah. It'll look good. Right. But thank you anyway. So, from us all here, thank you and goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.